Let's speak to Georgia Gilholy, journalist and commentator for Young Voices UK, who joins us on the programme this morning to go through the news of the day. Georgia, very good morning.
Hi, good to be here.
Brilliant. Well, lots of things we're going to discuss, but why don't we start with the story that we are leading with on Times Radio Breakfast and Times Radio Early Breakfast this morning, which is this £6 billion for the NHS. This is going to be in the budget, but they've sort of announced it a couple of days early. So talk to me a little bit more about the money, what it's exactly going to do. We know it's to help the backlog, but how and how's it all working?
So from what I can gather from the story that's been released this morning, obviously trailing ahead of the budget on Wednesday, the main point of it is to tackle the backlog of appointments. In terms of where it's actually going to go, it seems that it's mainly going to be going on increasing bed capacity, which has gone, plummeted massively over, the past 2 decades, actually. So it's sort of a very long-term issue. And of course, this government has, the Conservatives have been in power for a decade, or over a decade now, actually, and it's something that they've not necessarily tackled up until now. And who knows if this injection of cash will be enough too. I probably doubt that it will be. I've seen sort of read analysis that, reducing hospital beds is more of a choice than, we don't have enough money. But my concern really is that wherever the individual bits of this cash go, I just simply, I don't think the solution is going to be enough. We have 5.7 million people in England right now waiting for hospital treatment, mainly due to a backlog, due to sort of services that were reduced during the pandemic. And this figure is growing by 100,000 a month. And some of these people are going to have more critical issues. Some of these people are going to have less critical issues, or maybe ones that will develop over time if they're not able to get the treatment they are. Other things might not be picked up in time. So obviously it's something that needs to be improved. But, for some people, frankly, it's too late.
It's interesting, this one, isn't it? Because this is going to feature in the budget. Rishi Sunak has described this money as game-changing, which I guess is always a bit of a dangerous kind of phrase to use when you're talking about NHS funding, because if you say that, it's going to be game-changing, people are going to expect to see instant results, aren't they?
Yeah, with that kind of phrasing. But the scale of the issue we're facing, I think that you can't simply flick a switch tomorrow with some money and it's going to change. I think it's not about the money as well. In a lot of circumstances, I think there's mismanagement and bureaucracy and lack of training. And, let's think of in the long term as well, we're facing shortages of doctors and nurses, of people training as those things. And let's say, for example, we did have another lockdown, which is obviously sort of an open question at the moment. I wonder what the impact of that would be on people who feel that they might not want to leave their house, they're too scared to go to the doctors or the hospital, even if they can get an appointment. So there's so many questions hanging over, and I don't think it's really responsible to be sort of gearing this up as something really magnificent when it's probably not going to change that much right now or even within the next few years.
Let's move on to this one. A group of former police leaders, senior officers and advisors have written to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, to express their concerns about the police crime sentencing and courts bill and some of the proposals that are part of it. The House of Lords are going to continue considering this bill today. This feels quite significant. We've had a lot of public reaction to the police crime sentencing and courts bill, and now we have this group of former police leaders writing to the Home Secretary to say what, essentially?
They're essentially saying that using stop and search or increasing the use of it, I suppose in relation to certain protests and that kind of thing, is going to alienate certain people or certain communities. For example, obviously the Black community statistically is disproportionately targeted, I guess, in stop and search. I think that their words are quite interesting, and the fact they focus on stop and search is interesting. I don't think stop and search should be as politicised as it is necessarily. I think that there are definitely police who obviously misuse it and policing forces who misuse it. However, if you actually look at certain, let's say, like inner city communities where stop and search happens more, because obviously, you know, if you're living in a random village somewhere, there's not even any police about probably, so it's not happening. I think that those communities actually statistically say that they, you know, whatever race or religion community they are, they actually feel that it protects them because, you know, if you're getting stopped and searched for, let's say, I don't know, drugs or a knife, and they find that on you and then they arrest you, hopefully, you're out of the community and you're hopefully making things safer by doing that. And obviously, if they don't find anything, then you're not arrested. I imagine, obviously, it's never happened to me. I'm like a short white woman, so probably they wouldn't, I don't know, think that of me. And I imagine that if you're someone who might have been targeted, you know, multiple times, and you know you've never been involved in crime, I think it could be quite intimidating and victimizing. However, I think there is sort of a balance to be struck with those kind of things. And I think maybe we'd all rather, let's say someone gets stopped and then you get released because you haven't, you know, done anything wrong. That's better than, you know, ignoring everyone and letting people sort of walk around and they are actually at risk in the community. And I think you actually see in places like New York, where they phase out stop and search, the effects on some of those more those communities that have more issues with crime was actually bad. And you know, it's not sort of the politicians and the middle class commentators, you know, sitting around in their nice neighborhoods usually, who are actually going to have to sort of bear the brunt of what would actually happen with that. However, I do actually think there are massive issues in the policing bill. I think that it seems to propose some quite arbitrary powers that, say, in relation to free speech, the new proposals basically give police the authority to stop demonstrations if the noise is, you know, quote unquote, causing distress or alarm. Or
and I guess that bit is interesting because it's a lot of that it was linked, at least the coverage initially, to the protests that were held in response to, you know, the demonstrations with regard to Sarah Everard and other things. So that's been a major thing. And these former police leaders essentially saying that it could exacerbate violence, the way that the bill is phrased. Just wanted to cover a quick couple of things before we go. Firstly, 2 million people to be invited for a booster jab in England this week. This is in addition to those who have already received it. How many people are they hoping to get through the doors in total? And, you know, this seems like it's going to be a big week.
Well, I think overall they'd obviously hope everyone to eventually get through it. And it says, I think, in the story this morning that 7.5 million people were already invited, and 10 million people are actually eligible. So I'm thinking that they hope they'll sort of get on to the rest of those people who are eligible and haven't had it done. I think that probably most people haven't had it done. Well, obviously most people, they haven't been offered it yet, but the people who maybe have been offered it and they haven't taken it up yet, maybe they just sort of feel that they're okay without it. But obviously if you are in one of those more vulnerable groups, it definitely makes sense to get it and sort of shore up your protection from the virus in that way. But obviously the reason that most people haven't got it is because, one, they haven't offered it, and two, you have to get it sort of 6 months after the second dose, and most people, you know, it hasn't been that long. So yeah, I just hope that more people, I guess, will get it when they're able to.
Finally, this one I think is fascinating, and this plays into a huge debate that's happened, you know, I guess just beginning in the context of the British history. This debate is only just beginning, but it feels like it's been around for a little while now, which is the revision of history. And this is according to the broadcaster Trevor Phillips, who often speaks to us on Times Radio, who's written a paper saying that there is a growing trend to alter British history without due process. Talk to me a little bit more. What has he found and what's he calling for?
So I think the main argument here is that public institutions, so not private individuals, public institutions who obviously receive government funding, shouldn't be overly politicised when they deliver, I guess, their teaching of history or their idea of history. This is obviously a massively complex issue because I suppose in a way, you know, history is political because, you know, obviously certain things happened, and that's a fact, but our interpretation of it is sort of constantly shifting based on, I guess, the principles of our society at the time. Our interpretation of history is also part of history. And I think actually, in 100 years' time, 50 years' time, people will be, or even longer actually, sort of find it quite interesting how, Britain today sort of approaches its history in contrast with maybe how it has previously. And I think that, yes, I think public institutions shouldn't be sort of overly politicizing things. And I think it is a problem when we wish to force, I guess, our values in 2021 on every single aspect of history that's ever happened. And also if we, let's say, only do it with British history and not with world history, I think it gives you a bit of a distorted perception. But I do actually think one of the main issues, so the issues that's not really mentioned in this report, from what I can tell, is that the teaching of history in schools and universities, it's really gone down in rigour over the past decades. There was a stat from a few years ago that British teenagers are, the least educated in OECD nations. Most of them, didn't know when World War One happened, didn't know when World War Two happened. Some stat said something like a third of British teenagers thought that the Battle of Waterloo happened, during World War One. I think that in order to actually have, productive discussions about these things, rather than just, the left saying, oh, you're racist, and the right saying, oh, you're all too woke, we need to actually understand what happened in the past so we can discuss it. Otherwise, we are just sort of slinging insults without actually learning anything.
Georgia, thank you so much for your time. Georgia Gilholy, journalist and commentator for Young Voices UK, and it's interesting